Hello and welcome to Coffee and Catholics, a Catholic women's talk show podcast. I'm Speci, one of your hosts, and with me I have...
Hi, I'm Alicia.
I'm Annie.
And I'm Lauren.
Hello and welcome to Coffee and Catholics. This week we are going to be talking about resolving miscommunication that laity and clergy can sometimes have. And to do some of that, we have a guest with us today. Our guest is Father Christopher Brashears, who is a canon lawyer and parish priest for the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City. Welcome, Father.
Thank you.
So fun to have you with us.
It's good to be here.
Father, is there anything that you'd like to tell us about yourself before we get started?
Well, canon lawyer thing is very important. An expert in the law of the church. Did extra studies. I'm a judge in the tribunal, and I really find that my first day of canon law class really set the scene for how I approach the law of the church, not as a bunch of rules, but our professor, who was very eccentric, got up there and said, "You all have to study well, study hard, because you will have to protect the rights for the people of God that do not know they have any." And so it really kind of set the whole motion of 3 years of how I was going to study and to make sure that the people who don't know they have rights then have them protected.
And for those that may not know what the tribunal is, can you elaborate on what you do there too, just so?
Sure. The tribunal just is kind of like a court of civil authority, except that we deal with infractions of canon law. So we also deal with questions if people have doubts about the validity of their marriage and they want to ask for an investigation of nullity, then we look to see whether the evidence is there and present that it was null from the beginning. Of course, if there's other types of cases that we have to hear, other infractions against the law, then we do so judiciously.
We appreciate you coming and talking with us today. So I know there's going to be several things that we kind of talk about today, but I know one of the things that kind of when we were talking about this topic as a group, one of the things that kind of sparked that was the sacraments. And so a lot of times in several of like the moms groups I'm in, and even some personal experiences, a lot of times there's like stipulations to get to sacraments. And at what point are these like problematic? Does that make sense? Like,
Very much.
Well, because like the sacraments are our way to get to God and closer to Him, and and live our Christian life more fully. So having all these obstacles and hoops, it feels like sometimes we have to jump through to get to them. Like, I can understand some of the things to a point because you want to make sure that people are really rooted in their faith, but at the same time, like I said, when does this become a problem?
Oh, everybody knows when it becomes a problem. That's no biggie. It's when everybody starts getting upset, starting to get irritable, and even if there's tears and waterworks. And it oftentimes comes at terrible moments. One of the things that I don't think we do well enough in the church is to have education. So, for instance, when somebody has a brand new baby and they are so excited and joyful, hopefully, that there's no complications, there's no other issues or problems, and that they're faithful Catholics, and that they're not just being pressured by their parents to have the baptism or something like that. But even in those cases, likewise, you'll still have people coming to the church and saying, "All right, I'm ready to have the baptism. I'm really excited. Let's do this." All right, well, you need to go through baptismal prep. "I'm sorry, I said I have a baby to be baptized and to be adopted son or daughter of the Most High." "Yeah, you need to go through baptismal classes." When did anyone say anything about this? And that's one of the problems, that oftentimes it really comes kind of at a shocking moment that there's things to do. Now, the Code of Canon Law says that they must be prepared. The pastor must ensure that the parents and sponsors, if there are to be any, are prepared for the sacrament. Now, what does that mean? There's a lot of distance between there. So for some, it's, 1 hour course. For others, they sit there and say, "I'd like you to do more." Sometimes if you can't make the class that they're having, a lot of churches are now going to doing online stuff, like form.org has a whole beautiful baptism class coursework on it. And I've certainly, for my opinion, I think that's excellent. If you do that, if you do all 6 hours of that, you're good enough. But then, you've also got the questions of, okay, now, are you registered in the parish? We've had some phone calls where people say, well, I'm not with your parish, but I like your parish. Or they have even been honest sometimes and said, you know what, Father, I've called another parish and they won't baptize my baby. And I'm like, ooh, okay, now we need to talk. Because why is that? And there can be I'll say there's one valid reason for why a priest wouldn't baptize a child, at least by the code, by the law. And that is if they had no hope, not some hope, no hope of that child ever knowing their Christian dignity. How is this possible? When are the conditions of it? Very few and far between. It's not likely that you're going to have such a situation. In fact, what's most likely going to happen is that they have some recognition that they were baptized, they're a child of God in some sort or sense. The chance that it's not is if you're going to send your baby off in a spaceship to a planet far, far away, and that they are going to somehow get superpowers from their son, and they're going to have a wonderful life and lots of adventures. In that case, maybe, but even then, Kal-El, if you will, Superman, had his crystals from his father that told him all the things he needed to know. So even in that case, it really doesn't apply. So when we start looking into this, it's not something that priests need to be overly zealous about. In fact, if you find a canonist, they are most likely to baptize your child faster than anyone else because it is the gateway to all the sacraments. Now, here comes the dark part of this. The part that, is going to be Father's on our side. He agrees with us. Oh, yay, good. This is a good priest. And now you're going to get to the part where you say, maybe not too quick. Father Brashears is a stickler. The sponsors is a whole nother story. The sponsors have to be models of faith. Not only do they have to be models of faith, they have all of the restrictions placed upon them. So please don't get angry at your priests when they have really strong and strict regulations on the sponsors. They have to be 16 years old. They have to have received confirmation. And if they sit there and ask for proof of that, then they need proof of that, not an argument saying, well, I don't see why this is so important. Can't you just trust us? No, they've asked for it. They've been burned before.
So I have a question there because I have a godchild that has two godmothers and I'm the Catholic one. So what do you when that's the case, do both I know it's preferred, obviously, but what is the rules? Does that make sense?
Sure. Absolutely. And I get it. This, to somebody who hasn't had to deal with this seems like it is just a whirlwind of things. And so, sometimes your priests understand this. Sometimes they don't understand what it's like for you all to come in and to have all of these questions and have no idea what's going on. It just sounds like it's all made up on the spot. It sounds like they're just pulling, and then another thing and another thing. Well, when it comes down to the sponsors, if you're going to have two, then it has to be a male and a female. They don't have to be married. They don't have to be if they are married, it has to be in the church matrimonially, because otherwise they're not models of the faith. But both of those individuals have to be models of the faith. Now, what can happen, and since you said you were the Catholic party, very cleverly, very nicely, the canonist finds this as a delicious little detail, because he already knows then that the other party was not Catholic. And because of that, that person is not really a godparent. They are a Christian witness. So you can have a Christian witness alongside, and the rules for them are very vague. It was seen as kind of an ecumenical concession to say, we recognize that you have a good baptism and you're witnessing to baptism itself. So as long as they are validly baptized in one of the churches that is validly, and we accept their baptism as valid, then they can be it. So again, if your pastor sits there and starts saying, okay, Christian, okay, but what kind of Christian?
Yeah.
If we're talking about Mormons, the church doesn't accept their baptism because they have fundamental issues with the Holy Trinity. So they can't serve as a Christian witness. Well, but that's my brother, and I have wanted this for 100 years. And I know, and I'm really sorry, and that feels sensitive. Now, one area that I try to work with couples on, and especially when they come in with very fixed ideas, and their sponsors don't fit what the church requires of us, I try to sit there and say, there's a lot of other things we can do here. And then I ask the question, dawned on me years ago, are you all thinking that if both of you die in a car wreck, that these are the ones that are going to take your kids?
Yes.
And the answer is yes.
A lot of people think that.
Yes.
Yeah. That's not.
How do you pick godparents? I pick them because if we both die in a car wreck, which of course the statistics are incredibly infinitesimal on that. But again, we sit there and say, all right, this is what we're thinking of. So of course I want my brother to do this, or I want my sister to do this. Of course I want them to be with my uncle and aunt, regardless of their Catholic state or if they've been to church in the last 25 years. And so, they feel this very personally and deeply because they've come to a decision about the future of their children based on that horrible circumstance. I have some really bad news, everybody. The civil authorities do not at all ever ask the church in those situations who the child goes to. In fact, they have no care in the world who the godparents are, unless, and this I would encourage y'all to do, is to put that in your will. Because that is the only statement that the court will care about. A real, documented, civilly endorsed document that says, yes, this is our will.
I know that we've talked a lot about baptism so far, but let's go on to the next, sacrament of initiation in there. And go into the first reconciliation, first communion. I know that some of our listeners and some and friends of mine as well have expressed some frustrations with different requirements that have been either ones that are told from the beginning, or they get added on. And they're like, okay, so what, why does my kid have to memorize all these different things and go to a retreat that, that they're just, for 3 days. I think we had a listener, somebody who, they were requiring a 3-day overnight retreat.
Second grader.
And, compared to
my kids go on sleepover.
Compared to, if you were to come in through RCIA and you do the classes and then bada bing, bada boom, you get them all done,
That's right.
It feels like a little bit.
And I would agree that there's almost this kind of incentive for some parents to sit there and say, you know what, kids, we're going to wait. You've got your baptism. We're just going to wait until, oops, we didn't get you your sacraments in the regular order. Now you're in this RCIC, or
whatever
now it's OCIC, Order of Christian Initiation for Children. Yeah, it's going to take me about 10 years to get that right.
And then they'll change it again.
And then they'll change it because the church. So, as we look into this, I'm going to admit very openly, there are some times that extra things get put on the plate that shouldn't be there. So while I kind of outlined with baptism where, all right, there are some very rigid things that do have to be in place, especially for the sponsors. But I'll admit, there are priests out there who sit there, and sometimes it's not even as much as the priest as it is that we have a director of religious education, director of sacramental prep that wants to do more. And you sit there and say, well, shouldn't we give more? Yes. But are we going to make it an obstacle to them coming into it and say, if you really want to make a canonist shudder, you sit there and tell them about obstacles to the sacraments, because they sit there and they say, oh, our Lord Jesus Christ is going to punish you so bad. Because it is not, that's not what is intended here. The church wants to make it as easy as possible to approach the sacraments, and only limits whenever it's absolutely necessary. So again, the kids have to be prepared. So for both the sacrament of First Confession and First Communion. And there has to be some kind of preparation. Now, there's oftentimes programs and guidelines, and everybody's out there telling you they've got the magic bullet. And if only they do, for instance, a 3-day, and I don't even know the church, so here I am just picking on in general. But if there's this 3-day, retreat out there, and, oh, well, this will certainly set your kid on the right path, and they'll never leave the church if they just go to this 3-day retreat. Well, guess what? Life happens. And we can't predict everything, and we still trust in the Holy Spirit to do the work and not all on us. And the sacraments themselves are fonts of grace, each one of them. And so better for them to receive those fonts of grace. So what would I say are the minimums to deal with that, with First Communion? They have to be able to recognize what is the Eucharist apart from regular food. That's the bare minimum. Do they have to know all these other prayers? It'd be really good. And what's unfortunately happening nowadays is that there are a lot of parents who are taking their kids just for sacramental prep. Yeah. They don't have them consistently in RE classes. And so now it becomes almost like a graduation level. A rite of passage. Yeah. The kind of the goalpost line. And we're saying, all right, well, you haven't been bringing your kids. And the church has a tension there because the parents are the first teachers of the faith, and they are not to be interrupted in their presentation of the faith. And so it's only supposed to be supported by the church. So, but then you sit there and say, well, okay, let's have the Iowa test of basic skills for your prayer life. Do you know the Our Father? Well, how come you don't know the Our Father? And, that may be a reflection back on the parents, and maybe they're bad parents. Okay. But they still want their kid to have the sacraments. Mm-hmm. So are you punishing the kid for the bad behavior of the parents? Mm-hmm. Well, yes. And then those priests will all say, but what else are we supposed to do? Because if this kid keeps going on this path, they're going to receive First Communion, and then their Second Communion at their wedding, and their Third Communion at Viaticum. And they're going to die and receive the communion only 3 times in their life. Okay. Part of that is a sadness of the state of affairs.
But they'll have received 3 times.
And
so there's those both sides of it.
Yeah. And if we talk to the saints and we talk to the martyrs, and they would encourage at least the communion, and confession as well. Mm-hmm. But they want to make sure that it is fruitful for them. Right.
When you do that too, though, you also base the parents' work for what the Holy Spirit's going to do for the child's rest of their life. So it's kind of like, okay, maybe that's the case while they're with their parent, but what happens when they go off to college?
Right.
And then they do get married. They're, maybe they go away or maybe they come closer. That's the Holy Spirit's work at that point. So you have to kind of
sure.
You live your life and you be an example, but you have to let things happen.
So it is a tension.
Yeah.
How much the pastor has a responsibility to ensure that the kids are prepared. What is that level of preparation? Ambivalent. Mm-hmm. We're not quite sure. There's nothing put out by the Vatican that says they have to know the Our Father, the Hail Mary, and the Glory Be. No. And the diocese puts out some these kind of benchmarks of where your kid should be to understand something. And we should always want every kid to have more. And so if we're sitting there saying, but to hold the sacraments hostage from a child is so very hard to do. Now, I'll say all of that, and then I'm just going to flip and exactly play the devil's advocate on this, because I had an example of this up in the parish that I was at in Gaiman, and it was in the preparation for a quinceañera. And the girl had come in and she said, I want my quinceañera. I said, well, okay, but you're not confirmed and you haven't been in classes. And so, okay, well, I'll work with you. We'll try to work something out. It's not a sacrament, obviously, so it doesn't have to, there's no kind of expectation of it, but I'm happy to work with you. But on this, I'm going to need you to go through this catechetical program on form.org. I want you to go through it, and if you have questions, write them down. And in fact, just for every episode, just write down 2 or 3 sentences of summary of what you did with that. And then we'll talk about it. And then as long as you understand basic things, we'll go ahead and have the quinceañera. Well, comes the day. She didn't do her homework. Dog ate it, whatever. She wanted to make a lot of excuses. And I said, oh, if I hadn't made some of those myself, and if I hadn't shortly been a teacher, I would have no sense of this. But this is just complete wash. And so, I said, fine, let's put all that aside. I said, who is Jesus? Because again, I'm worried about her soul. She is 15 years old. This may be the last time we see her. And I sit there, this may be the last conversation she has with a priest, with anybody. And I just say, who is Jesus? She couldn't answer. Well, she kind of fumbled around. She said, that guy who taught us about tolerance and just getting along and how the most important thing is just to do everything to get along. And I said, well, mostly you're thinking of Gandhi. But also, Jesus Christ said that I've come to set fire upon the earth and how I wish it were already ablaze. And if you do not hate your father and mother, brother and sister, you cannot be my disciple. So I said, how does that square with what you said? She didn't know. Now, I'm not asking everybody to know the answer to that off the top of their head, especially a 15-year-old girl. But I did it to challenge her and to say, I don't think you really know who Jesus is. And then I said something very stark to her. I said, I think you're going to hell. I think that when you get to heaven, you will stand before Jesus, but you will also stand before 100 other men that look like Jesus. And you have to follow the right one, because Jesus said, my sheep know my voice, and they will follow me. You have to know his voice to go to heaven. And I said, and if you don't, I think you will follow the wrong way to hell. So I said, I'm very worried about you. And her mom's sitting right there, and her mom was nodding the whole time. And when she went out of the car, and her mom stayed back to talk to me, she said, Father, I think it's too late. I said, it is not too late. Not for Jesus, not for anyone. It is his love can overcome. But this is the fear of the priests, that somebody comes in and really doesn't know anything. Yeah. Well, to this end, this girl almost doesn't know her Christian dignity, because she couldn't even explain what baptism was. She couldn't explain what it meant to be a child of God. She couldn't explain, just the most basic things of faith. And so the priests have to juggle these. And so when they over-exaggerate sometimes, when they overcorrect, I hate to say it, it comes from a good place, even when it's wrong. So, and I know this causes problems, and I know this causes pain. And so this is the kind of the in-between here is how do we reconcile these things?
Oh, I just wanted to say that explanation that you just gave cleared so many things in my heart that I was frustrated about. Hearing you say from your heart and from your missionary heart, which is so obvious in everything that you speak, that this comes from a place of fear for someone's soul, and that when we overcorrect, it's out of love, even if it's wrong. And I think that that is the starting point for that tension that you're mentioning, that necessary tension between, parents and priests and formators and that kind of thing, that maybe the goal, we should just be okay with the tension and realize that we need to just see where the others are coming from and try to meet each other in the middle. And I think that's where the frustration comes from parents, because it feels like it's not so much that we don't want them to know their prayers and stuff, like all of that is incredibly important to us as Catholic parents too, where we get frustrated over these things on top that, like Annie mentioned, like these giant retreats or these giant amounts of service hours for now 11 and 12-year-olds. I heard of one parish that was requiring 30 service hours for 11-year-olds being confirmed. Now, I've not heard of anything like that in Oklahoma City. I don't think we do that here. But I
phew, good. Then let's dish. All right, let's go ahead and trash on them. As long as it's not OKC.
But I was just like I think that's where that fear, that frustration with parents comes in, because we're just like, oh my gosh, you guys, we are homeschooling our kids anyway, or we've got them in school, they're in practices. We are doing our work as parents, and we can barely do that because we have to check all these boxes. But I think what you said was so beautiful, like just open a dialogue, open a dialogue more between these sacramental formators and these priests and be like, look, this is how we feel. Is there some way we can come across the aisle and work together? Just hearing you say it like that, like, I know maybe it was wrong, but you have to understand it's love. And that story you told, oh my gosh, that's chilling. Like, that was just, thank you for sharing that. That was just really beautiful. That healed actually a lot of hurt in me, just that story.
Glory be to God. Glory be to God.
Yeah. I think a lot of times transparency, because like you said, like, because the priests do these things but I don't know if it's like just because of time or whatever, and they just kind of like make this blanket statement and nobody knows why. And then everybody gets angry and starts forming their own reasons why, or they're just upset. And if I think sometimes that there's just some, like what you just said, like, I know that this is really hard. Like parents who have had multiple kids already been baptized and still have to go through baptismal prep. Like, this is number 4. I'm pretty sure I got this down by now, but okay.
That's my favorite example. Because that's what when I heard that, somebody said, first of all, I heard about this 1 year and then it expires. And I said, what, this information in their brain expires? I said, I know of nothing. I mean, mine actually has a much shorter shelf life, but I was like, I don't imagine that they just completely jettisoned everything about the most important day of their child's life except for their birth, and really arguably theologically more important. And so, I sat there and I was kind of like, I don't think that's how we treat.
Closely, not always, but they're somewhat closely spaced too. Like, I just took this class last year, Father. Like, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Or even the godparents, though. Like, they just had their kid baptized like just a couple of months ago. Now they're gonna be my kid's like they have to take the classes again. So like you said, like I know that's from love. But I think sometimes this holding on to, I have my biology teacher at one point, growing up, and he was Catholic, said, there's exceptions to every rule. Maybe not every rule, but that's always, but like, so, parents of multiple kids who've already gone through some of these things, maybe they don't have to rebuy the book they already own at home, or,
I think that is a very good place to start.
Or
I have the book. Yeah. No, buy another one. Are you making money off of this?
They're not. And so, because, but just like just having that clear, transparent dialogue, like, I understand why you have this, but this is where I'm having a problem with it. Or why the sudden change,
Sudden, and
that's what it feels like.
And something that part of that transparency is that while they've been coming to a decision for some time, and almost every decision is because of a person, so it's probably because of one of the parishioners that we have a new rule. We don't like to say that, just like you as parents don't like to say it about your children. Okay, new rule, and we're calling it the little Christopher rule. That's not the we don't want to do that any more than you all as parents want to scar the children. We don't want to scar the parishioners either.
I have a friend who wants to know, because she's asked so many priests this. We talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but why is it that a convert can go through RCIA at age 8 or older, get all the sacraments done, whereas a cradle Catholic has to go through all the different things at different levels and different times, and often has different like hoops to jump through, it feels like. So, this friend of mine, she is a convert. Her kids are now cradle Catholics, and she has a lot of frustrations over that.
Lots
and she
of
has
frustration.
gotten, the only response that she's gotten is, well, they need, converts need more graces. So can you speak on that?
No. So as far as converts needing more graces, well, it seems like you're dragging out the education and the length of time of preparation for the others, and so it seems like cradle Catholics need more. But in reality, we all need more. the RCIA or OCIA program is meant as a preparation, but there's been lots of discussions that 1 year isn't even sufficient for it. Because you get to the end of it and you say, it feels like we barely scratched the surface. Now, normally what happens with those converts is they are so zealous themselves, finally coming to the faith, they go ahead and they overindulge anyway, so we don't have to worry about that. But the problem is that it's not good and sound reasoning to say that the converts need more grace. We all need more grace. Every single one of us needs more grace. But I think part of that is thinking that what is the best situation is that they have a continuance and a culture of learning about the faith. That's why for the Catholics there is this RE program as it has been set up, is that they start in preschool and kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, on up. And the whole thing is we want them to have a culture of continuing to learn about Jesus, learning about the love of God, learning how to accept His grace to become the saints we're called to be. And we know that the more that we have of that is the better. That's why Catholic school systems are pushed so heavily, and so that we can have that day after day for the kids, that we can have, and in many homeschooling programs, there is this component so that it is day after day. So in a sense, I would say, honestly, it's more important that everyone have more and not less. But then you sit there and say, well, it's easier. Yeah, it is. And in the end, it is easier. Would I encourage you to wait? No. What I encourage you is to have the best. Encourage you to have your kids going through those things. And if there are some doubts as to the efficacy, how enriching the programs really are, because I have to say, I'm not really sure the one I went through when I was in grade school was really great. They have some great ones nowadays, but maybe your church isn't using those, or maybe you have doubts about it. Maybe you read this and you say, all you said was Jesus loves you. They learned that last year, and they learned that the year before. When are they going to learn about the sins and how to avoid them? When are they going to learn more about virtue? One of the things that I'll throw you this out because this is a little bit related. I angered so many parents and way more 7th and 8th graders this year when I came to the parish and I said, you know what? You were told that 6th grade confirmation and you're done with art. Oh no, you're not done. Father Brashears is saying for the 7th and 8th graders, you're going to do theology of the body. That's awesome. Because they need theology of the body in 7th and 8th grade. And next year, the 7th and 8th graders are going to do apologetics because they also need to be able to answer for their faith. So in some of these things, you may challenge your priests a little bit to think for things that are more relevant. And I don't mean that the Bible's not relevant. I don't mean that Jesus is not relevant and that He loves them is not relevant. I mean that there may be some of these things which are more impactful for the age group that they are and more potent, and it's just because nobody's asked, why don't we change up what we're doing? Why don't we change the way that we're doing these things to the point that it's not an obligation, a pressure, a pain, but why isn't this that it's uplifting my kids? How come we don't have a Maria Goretti? Not that I'm asking for martyrs. Martyred children, the worst. But I reference the martyred children because they had faith they would die for. San Jose Luis del Rio, Sanchez del Rio, he sat there and at this young age, with cut feet, he walked to his grave. And then at the very end, as he's looking death in the face, he said, Viva Cristo Rey. Long live Christ. So, you're sitting there and you say, I don't think I had that faith when I was that age. Where does that come from? How come we don't prepare kids to be the saints already? What is it that we need to be doing? And what kind of things outside of the box, different things that we need to be doing? How do we enculturate them better so that it's not an oppressive thing? It's not, and that we're not looking for the easier thing. We're looking for the greater thing. So is it easier? You're right. Absolutely. It's easier to have a 1-year thing. But I'm, again, back to that kind of heart of the priest, loving his children, wants them to have something better, wants them to really become the saints that they're called to be.
With the our OCIA, OCIC, when you're coming into the church as a convert, I know that you receive all the sacraments. Well, not all, because obviously not holy orders,
All of the initiation,
all the sacraments of
Yes.
initiation, and including confirmation at the younger kids as well. I know that in our diocese we've lowered the age a bit, and other ones it's is it called restored order, where you have confirmation before, and I know it's different from diocese. It's some my friend who I was speaking to, her diocese, it's I guess it's older,
15, 16.
Yeah, I think it's actually seniors or juniors and seniors.
Oh, yeah.
So it's that Catholic graduation.
We're split here in Oklahoma. Tulsa's still older kids.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Our diocese.
Yeah.
I say state, but yeah. And so, why is it that with convert, when you come into the church as a convert, do you receive all of why is it that it's all at once? I mean, I know we talked about why to go ahead, not doing that, when you're cradle, going through it, but why is it that they are all at once as opposed to
Spread out? Especially if we think that it's better to take longer to prepare. So before there was the RCIA or the OCIA, as it's now called, there was just, the code says that it's the pastor's responsibility to make sure that they are prepared to receive the sacraments of initiation. So sometimes you'll find some older people who are converts who said, oh yes, I went to the priest, I took instruction. And that means they met with the priest until the priest was satisfied. And
we had that at the parish I grew up in.
Yeah.
That's just not that long ago.
Yeah.
RCIA was a thing, and then he just disregarded it.
and that is the pastor's prerogative. He can absolutely just toss out the RCIA program and say, I'm still doing instruction. And I will meet with each one of them, and I will prepare them. I will ensure that they are ready. Okay. And they can come and assist at most often the Easter Vigil to receive initiation when they are ready and not a moment before. There's a beauty in that, in the fact that it is personal, it is engaged, it is to their pastor, and that they have that recognition that you're not ready yet. Spiritually, you're not in this place yet. Instead of, oh, well, you did 1 year, so obviously you're going to get to go in at Easter. And again, we sometimes do really treat this thing very goal and object oriented. We're very American, and we're very pragmatic, and we're like, yes, just get it done. Get it.
Check the list.
Yeah, get it, just get it done. And the most efficient way possible. That's our mindset. Instead of the best way possible. And the best way possible is not always the most efficient. And that's very kind of almost heresy to American idealism. But there's a real beauty in that. So should we then instead go back to instruction? Challenges with that. In the parish that I'm at right now, we have, I think even though we've had some come in midstream, and so they're going to continue to finish out this year, and then they'll come back next year, I think we have something like 20 some people. And so,
that's wonderful.
And there's some benefit towards them being together, and there's some benefit towards them, kind of building off of each other, and the sponsors have to come to the class with them. And so there's also benefit there, and there's community building. What's the right answer? I don't know. Okay. But why do they receive, canonically, why do they receive the sacraments of initiation all at once? Because they have to. Okay. Because they're being initiated.
Okay. That makes sense.
And only to us critical Catholics, we think, no, of course you separate them out. Well, the baptism can be received with the intention of the parents. So they answer for the child. And so infant baptism is a thing. So we want the child to have grace as soon as possible and to not worry about their mortal soul. We want them to already be adopted children of the Most High from the very beginning. In fact, even 8 days after birth, or sometimes, even as it happens, there have been baptisms within the womb. So we're sitting there, we're saying, we want those children to have that gift. Okay, but they can't receive First Communion until they recognize what it is. Okay, but we disagree with the Orthodox on that, because the Orthodox, they give them communion right away. So that's a disagreement between the East and the West, and whenever we start our reconciliation talks, that'll have to be decided. Until then, we're going to operate as they still have to distinguish. So then we have confirmation, and yes, restored order, and then you have all those questions of when should it happen. And the question is difficult, because they do have to at least have the age of reason, as far as in the Roman Church. And so they have to be able to have some distinguishing faculty to rationale, this is important in this way. So it's split up for us, but not true of every group of Christians out there. And again, the Orthodox is an example of initiation happens all together.
Thank you for that very thought out and more like direct answer about those, rather than just they need more grace.
Yeah. And again, maybe the priest was like, I don't know. It sometimes doesn't make sense to me either.
Yeah.
And that happens too. Like I said, sometimes you go to the priest and you yell at him and you say, I don't know why this is happening. And he says, I don't know either. So, sometimes, it's one of those things where sometimes we also believe that the priest is fully prepared for everything. I'm a canonist. I get phone calls from priests all the time. I'm happy to get them, but I get them all the time. What do we do in this situation? Is this okay to do? Is this not okay to do? Or is this wrong? Is it? So we sometimes think that, our priests come out there just like our parents do. And they come out there and they're like, this is what we do because this is what's right. And you're like, my parents are really sure of things and they know everything. And the parents are like, oh my goodness, did we pull it off? Did they believe us? Because I was so unsure about that just now. Yeah, same things. Just to give that reflection. Same thing. We sometimes bluff. So, we sometimes don't have all the answers. But, it does. And I think that sometimes we don't do a good enough job. And one of the things that we sometimes do is we say, we put it in the bulletin. But nowadays, the reading of the bulletin comes down to about maybe 15 to 20% of our parishioners are reading it. Mm-hmm. And the others take it to be, kind and not, the ushers and the greeters are very nice to hand it to them. And they're like, thank you. I'm just going to throw it in the back of the seat and it's going to stay there until I throw them away.
It turns into fireplace.
There you go. At least it's going to something.
My 5-year-old always gets the bulletin and he won't give it to me.
So. Coloring pages. Good.
He says he's reading it. But
at least someone is reading it.
I'm like, can I see it for a second? And then
I've
usually get it up online
more often.
Yeah.
Well, and so, part of this is, the modes of communication. How are we reaching people where they are, Pope Francis? And, what are we trying to really come across with? And some of the time, I think priests get a little concerned that if they start down the path of explaining things, it opens it up for, but Father, but what you didn't consider, and say, this isn't a democracy. And that is hard because we're so democratic. We are so much people who like the process of it, and we want to bring all these things out. And then there's some times that we can't say certain things.
It's like a former teacher. Well, Mrs. Ryder, what if? Well, I can't. We don't have time for all the what ifs. This is how we're going to do it. And if something happens later on down the road that makes us deviate from this, then we'll address it then. So, yeah.
One of the things I would encourage, though, is to meet with your priest. Yeah. Some priests are more accessible than others, I recognize. But my door is always open to people to come in and have discussions about things. And I've been yelled at so much. And most priests have. So also realize there's a little bit of shell shock there. Sometimes they're just like, okay, welcome in, Mrs. So-and-so, and I cannot wait to find out what you're going to yell about me about this today. And so sometimes we do have that kind of worn downness because we are pastor over oftentimes hundreds of people. And, you may say, well, I've never brought up a difficult thing to the priest ever. Sure, you may never have, but so-and-so has, and they just did it today or yesterday or the day before, or we have this funeral we're planning here, we got this and that, we've got this breathing down our neck. So just like you all have pressures in your lives and your children come to you and you're trying just to be so patient with them, but your brain is just exploding and all these other things are going on. You sit there and you want to say, okay, honey, tell me what's bothering you. But one of the things I just recently had, was a guy came in, and over Christmas, I had gone in and said, at the Christmas Mass, like most places do, that, people for their communion, we just ask that if you're a Catholic who is well disposed to receive the sacrament, to present yourself in the normal way. If you're not in a state that's well to receive the sacrament today, or you're not Catholic, we just ask you remain in your seats and pray for the peace of the world. Okay. Well, I didn't know how that affected this person. They came in and said, my grandchildren that were there, and, this made them feel very, unwelcome. And I said, I did not envision that at all. I didn't see that. I didn't imagine that. And so I said, I'm really sorry. I said, that was one of those unintended consequences. And I said, I'm really sorry. I said, I need to work on that. And he said, I'm not yelling at you, but, it is one of those things that you probably weren't aware of. How that hit, how that registered home. And so again, sometimes the priests do that. And sometimes the priests need help to know how to reach people. Oftentimes, if they have someone with solutions, proposals for ideas of what to do better, it sometimes helps. And you know what? I guarantee you 9 times out of 10, if you say, Father, I volunteer to take this project on. He'll say, that is wonderful.
That's why I don't bring these things to people. Because I know that means I'm volunteering. Sometimes I am, though.
But, the feedback really does help the priests, even if they're not always really excited to hear it. Mm-hmm. And, not to think that if you bring this up, well, then Father's going to look at me different. I'm going to be so-and-so, and I'm going to be that mom that brings all these things up, or I'm the dad who brings all this stuff up. No. But in this, it's difficult for all parties. And there's a lot of situations out there. Yeah. And there's a lot of things that we didn't plan for this. We're not quite sure how to do this. How do we adapt to this? When you have a state where somebody is mentally deficient, okay, then you have to deal with them in a different capacity, in a different way. Or if they sit there and they have learning disabilities, those two then have to be approached in a different way. And, one of the things that I appreciate being brought up here, tonight is about homeschooling. That's a hard thing for priests to kind of get their head around. Is they're like, okay, homeschooling. So you're doing your sacramental prep at home. And really, oftentimes you're doing better sacramental prep than they can even do in the church. Why? Because you can do it every day. Mm-hmm. You can do it consistently. You can do it rhythmically in the lives of your kids, that it makes sense that all these things are working in that way. So, yeah. But clarity is important.
Well, and I know you and I have had discussion before too, where I had somebody who was having a difficult situation at their church, that it just seemingly came out of nowhere that we're not doing this anymore. And when we brought it up to you in the discussion over dinner one night, you told us why that was, and I'm like, that makes so much sense. But if they had just, instead of saying, we're not doing this anymore, had said, we're not going to do this because we really shouldn't have been doing it in the first place, because this is how the rules are set up and the rubrics are set up, then this is why we're not doing this now. I think that would have been received a lot easier by the person that I knew that was having that struggle than it just being blanket said in mass, we're not doing this anymore. Yeah. And then being done with it.
And one of the cases I think the church did well with this was actually the new translation of the Roman Missal. Mm. Because when the new translation came out, there were no priests saying, yes, I have chosen to change the words. No, everyone threw the church under the bus. Right. And we said, the church did this. It's not us. We don't want to say the word consubstantial, but this is what the church told us to do. So, I mean, it was kind of an easier transition. And I think that sometimes priests don't know how to throw the church under the bus on these things, to put them on the burning pile and to burn them at the stake. It's okay. The church has been here for a long time, and she does have rules. And part of that is, coming to the canonists, and the canonists are very happy. We like prevention. We really don't like to clean up messes. Okay. So if the priests sit there and you say, you know what, I want to kind of figure this out. I want to go with this information. I want to help the priest, and maybe say, I want to be a liaison to the parents. I want to be your communications person. Father, let me look this over before you put this out. I want to help you. Because sometimes priests, they're not always equipped with the same abilities. Mm-hmm. So, you have one who can come in and, everybody loved Father so-and-so. He was so wonderful, and he was just so great. And then the next priest comes in and says, yeah, Father so-and-so abused the liturgy horribly and all these things. How dare you? He was wonderful. Right. Well, wonderful aside, he may have made some things that were awful. And now, as the priest coming in, I have to answer to God for what I do. Mm-hmm. And Pope Francis made very clear in this last document on the liturgy, you must give the people exactly what the church gives them. Nothing more, nothing less. You do not have the right to change anything. So he just could not scream that clear in the document to make this clear to his priests. Give them what they ought to have.
We will release the conclusion of this conversation in 2 weeks. And as always, thank you for joining us.
Thanks. Thank you.
Join us again in 2 weeks. Until then, may God bless you, and may Mary accompany you. Coffee and Catholics is a proud partner of the SmartCatholics Podcast Network. Find new shows to love, meet like-minded Catholics, and join the community at smartcatholics.com.